Can you hear me okay? Yes, okay, great. Well, welcome, good morning. My name is Susan, and we'll be speaking about our inclusion audit and the ongoing work we're doing in inclusion. I feel like it's a good prelude to say that we are far from finished with this work, but we have learned a lot, and the ongoing process of re-examining who we are and what we do through the lens of racial equity has been one that has taught us a lot, and every time we learn something new, it uncovers many more layers of work to be done. So we're hopeful that this will help spark ideas for you for how you approach your own teaching and learning environments, and some of the lessons we've learned hopefully will be interesting to all of you. So CYSO, if you don't know us, Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestras, we have about 650 students now, so the work that we're doing is mostly limited to that pool of students, which is small in comparison to all of the students learning music in Illinois and the students performing music at a high level, but we're working really hard at our small pool. We have orchestral music, those are some of our orchestral students, and a steel can program now, and a jazz program. So we have various different disciplines. The main work of our inclusion efforts for racial equity have been focused on the orchestral program, frankly because that's where we see the most room for growth in terms of a strong racial balance. These are, I hope you can read that. These are some statistics about who we are. We have 21 different programs now, as I said, 650 students. We do provide financial assistance for every student who needs it, and all tuition is actually subsidized as well. We have a 100% graduation rate to college, and about half of those students are pursuing music, either music education or music performance at college. And then overall, we reach 8,500 young people, mostly through peer-to-peer service learning, where we do education concerts for younger elementary school students, and then in-school performances as well, and mentoring. Those are mostly focused on the Chicago Public Schools. You can see some of our satellite locations, and then most of our rehearsing and teaching happens in the Loop at the Fine Arts Building. The reason we embarked upon this inclusion work was we have always been a multicultural institution because students came to us from different schools. We were actually founded by students who wanted to have a performance opportunity in addition to their school music programs. So students, by that very nature, came to us from all different schools. They represented diverse communities. So we've worked with students of color always, and increasingly throughout our history from when we were founded in 1946. However, we've never really studied it in depth. The evolving makeup of our student body. It's just sort of evolved naturally up until recently, where we said we'd like to move to a more active stance rather than a passive stance in terms of really understanding what's happening with recruitment, retention, and advancement of students within our programs. And also, are there any places where we are doing a less than optimal job of making sure people feel welcome and informed and included in both joining CYSO in the first place and then being in CYSO once they are one of our students. So that's why we began the work. We also, the first thing we noticed, and when I have only been with CYSO for 2.5 years, so when I first came in, I noticed that our younger, more introductory ensembles, which are as young as 6 years old in the string programs, are more naturally balanced in terms of racial makeup. And then as we work up to the most low admission, most elite orchestra, the symphony orchestra, that one has the highest proportion of white students. It's certainly more regional by that level. The younger groups tend to be more Chicago-based, so some of the racial balance is in response to just geography and location of where these students are coming from.
But we really wanted to study, is there a reason why students aren't making it all the way throughout all of the programs and graduating from our most advanced ensemble? We didn't want to be beginning a more balanced group of students from a racial perspective than we're graduating, because we know that talent is equally distributed and opportunity is not. So if there are barriers where we were participating or not helping to alleviate those barriers, we wanted to know. So we've set some, let's see, this is the process we went through. But actually, I'm going to skip forward to show you the demographic information. And these are small again, so I apologize. But the main thing I was trying to communicate here was, one, we've set some goals for the evolution of our student body. This is not to say that we are having context involved in auditions in any way. The auditions are just scored on how the students play in the 7 minutes they're in their audition room. But we're hoping to see the student body evolve by making sure students are well prepared, they have the information that they need going into the audition, and they also have the training and the access to training, instruments, lessons, everything they need so that they can win those auditions when they're in that room. So the goals for overall student body composition are to move from where we were last season, which is 9% African American, to 15%, and then from where we were last season, which was 15% Latinx, to 25%. So that's certainly not exactly representative of Chicago as a community, but for us, we think that's realistic growth to have a more balanced student body composition. And then for perspective, we've listed the League of American Orchestra's recent data on professional orchestra tenured positions. And that obviously looks pretty bleak from a racial equity perspective. We are still 85% white. Sometimes there's a perception that Asian Americans are well represented or overrepresented in classical music. And actually, if you look at tenured positions in professional orchestras, we're only 9% Asian American. We're right now, as you can see, 36% Asian American in our student classes that we're graduating. So there's a disconnect there in terms of who's continuing in music and who's eventually winning those positions. And then only 1.8% African American and 2.5% Latinx in professional orchestras in America overall. So we've got some room for growth there, because we know certainly white musicians are not better at classical music than other races. There's just an opportunity gap and some certainly inclusion work that can happen in the field as a whole to make this a hospitable and productive learning and professional environment for people from all backgrounds. And then this is just to show what I was saying before about the continuum of programming that we have at CYSO. Overture Strings is our most introductory string ensemble, and as you can see, that's a pretty healthy racial balance that's just happening naturally. Those are the kids who signed up to play string music with parents who are interested in classical music for their 6 to 9-year-olds. And then when you get to symphony orchestra, which is the most difficult in terms of admission, most advanced, we're only 2% African American and 12% Latinx by that group. So there's some disconnect, even within our own programs. And then, of course, by the time you launch to professional jobs as well. And then you can see our overall student body is a little bit, that's maybe confusing, but that's in between in terms of balance than the symphony orchestra and the overture strings. Here we go. So before we started our work, we kind of met as an organization with all the different constituent groups that we represent. So first, that came from our board. We were in strategic planning. We have a board that more or less represents the student body that we serve, and we said we can't have excellence and inclusion as two different goals. They go hand in hand. We are excellent because a diversity of students participate here at a very high level, so that has to be fundamental to who we are and where we're going. So we had to kind of have that agreement in the beginning, because this work is scary. It's possible as we revise things to try to improve them, it's possible we make mistakes. We certainly have made mistakes already in terms of retooling something with the goal of being more inclusive, and we actually made it worse or made it more confusing. And we also needed an investment of time and resources to slow down enough to study what was happening in our student body and how we could improve. So we really needed that board investment and staff agreement that this was a priority, and we really wanted to work on it together. We have a strategic plan with diversity goals in it, but we had to understand that we don't know what the outcome will be. We aren't just going to admit a student body that has that racial proportion. We're hoping to inject training and advice and mentoring at the right stages so that eventually the students winning those positions in that top orchestra just are that racial makeup. But we aren't informing the admissions process itself with a racial bias of any kind. So we had to balance that. We don't know exactly how long this will take or how it will go, or we've seen, for example, more rapid growth in our Latinx student population than in our African American student population, and we don't really know why that's happening. So there's a lot of unknown and a lot of different opinions, especially working with parents and teachers who know students really well and have their own opinions and beliefs about how classical music is working for them. We had to balance really not knowing the answers to a lot of these questions we were asking. We also know that many other folks in Chicago and in our country are experts at racial equity work, and we were not. We were just beginning it. So asking the right questions to people who really have made their life's work out of perfecting educational approaches through this lens was helpful for us, and it was important to kind of acknowledge and admit that we were not the leading experts in this area. We were trying to become a little bit better and understand that we would make mistakes and inadvertently make the wrong move when we were trying to adjust correctly. And then workforce development, all the inclusion work represented more staff time, more data and evaluation, so new additional stuff. And for a nonprofit, we're usually pretty stretched to the gills in terms of how many staff we have and how they're spending their time. So we really had to acknowledge that this would take a lot of work. So our process was we convened students, parents, alumni, students and parents, all from different racial, ethnic, cultural, geographic, and economic backgrounds. We wanted a mixture of people in each of those conversations. We had a third-party evaluator run those focus groups, so it wasn't any of us. And amazingly, what came from those meetings, we spent a lot of time on them, and we had almost no, I actually think not a single comment from any of the notes from the meetings that said, I, as a Latin American person who's in the viola program, or I, as any particular racial identity, feel thus and such. Which we thought, we asked the questions of how we're doing. We thought we might hear precise feedback on how we were serving various communities. Instead, we heard a lot of general feedback about, I feel like this world of classical music is foreign to me. I feel like there are people who know the ins and outs of what to expect and the implicit culture of classical music, and I feel like I don't know, and I don't know how everyone else knows, but I just don't know what the protocol is for seating auditions, and I'm afraid to ask because it seems like everybody else knows. And we heard that with a wide variety of topics, but that feeling of help navigating, making implicit assumptions explicit, and explaining why and how we do things and what we are looking for and how we evaluate students was really needed, and we weren't doing a good enough job there. We did demographic analysis of applicant pool, which students were auditioning for us, who was admitted, which we'd never studied before, if there was any difference there in terms of the applicant pool and the admitted pool. And then also demographic analysis up through our continuum of programs. We did some surveying of our community, both within students in CYSO and with a community of teachers and other third-party arts providers on what the experience had been for them sending students to us and how that went for them. I'll pause to say, I'm sure we didn't effectively survey everyone in this room, and many of you refer students to us, so I would love to hear from you how you've experienced CYSO through your students and how we can improve. We did external partner interviews, and that included, we really focused on people who either have said they haven't had a good experience with us or they are not referring students to us. And we learned a lot. And then we did a lot of professional development for our team. We did a 3-day anti-racism training, which was amazing. If you're interested, it's the curriculum's through Crossroads and the Chicago Organizing for Racial Equity. The acronym is CROAR. But it's a really good 3-day anti-systemic racism training. It was very transformative for me personally and also for our team. We did trauma-informed arts instruction training for our whole team, and then cultural competency training. So it was all new for us, and it was good to have a shared vocabulary to work with as we discussed these things internally. We all kind of needed that training to begin talking about it productively. We saw those already. So we've done this for 2 years, and this is our 3rd year, and we only have more work to do. We've learned a lot and we've improved our work, but we are far from finished. We are actually only just now analyzing the student body makeup of this year because it evolved up until this week. So we'll look at that and see if any of the groups have evolved the way we're hoping to see them evolve. But we actually don't know yet until we know how all the enrollment settles. But we've made some significant changes. We have mostly focused those on extending program navigation, re-evaluating financial assistance and how that works, and including social emotional learning opportunities and additional training for our staff who work with students. We hired a new staff member, was a big result of this process. We realized that most of that navigation of, hey, I don't know where to get a new instrument. Is my instrument appropriate? Should I go to summer camp? I don't think my private teacher is working for me and I don't know who to call. All of it were little tiny questions where we didn't have staff capacity to answer them effectively. So we added a person who has a Chicago Public Schools teaching background and also high-level orchestral background. So she serves kind of both perspectives and is able to answer. She just has office hours now and answers questions for all students, not just students of color by any means, but everybody. We increased our focus on representation, and it had never occurred to us before that the adults that we select to be on the concerto competition review panel, to be behind the table in the audition room, to any adult with decision-making power, we needed to have a diverse range of adults featured just to show the kids the adults making decisions about you are varied and they don't only represent, it's pretty easy on autopilot to have a panel of only white men. And we learned that when we went on autopilot and didn't think about it, it's easy to choose a person who's at the top of our Rolodex who we happen to know who may not always represent all different perspectives. So we tried to move towards more awareness in that area. And there's lots of people from all different backgrounds who are excellent practitioners in the Chicago region, so we just needed to know that list better. We have worked on student recruitment, onboarding, providing more audition feedback rather than saying we offer feedback but we don't talk about it a lot because it's a lot of work to give 650 students feedback on every seating and admission audition. We now hype it more, and it's more work to give more feedback more often, but it's better for the kids to know that that's an option and to be encouraged to seek it out. We reduced ticket prices so families don't have a barrier attending their own students' performance, because we heard from families that $20 tickets to see their student perform was a barrier. And for some families, it's no barrier at all. For other families, that's painful. So we reduced tickets to $5, and we now are hopeful that we'll have maybe even bigger audiences, but at least less distress for any family to come to concerts to see their kid perform. And our Inclusion Audit Steering Committee, which is a mixed group of board, staff, artistic faculty, parents, and alumni parents, who wildly disagree with each other all the time, which is great. They will continue to meet. And so they're guiding the work, and every time we change something, we kind of bring it to them. If it didn't work, for example, we revised our whole financial assistance form and process this year, and we were so hopeful it would result in an increase in financial assistance applications. and it didn't. We saw the exact same number of financial assistance applications. So we don't know if that is just the number of middle to low income folks that we have in our program, or is the form still confusing and intimidating and are people shying away from filling it out? So we are working on that. Part of that process has been to be explicit about who qualifies and to say anyone with household income under, we actually said $80,000 last year, but it's more like $100,000. If your household income's under $100,000, we want to discount your tuition, and we've planned for it, and we really want to do that. But we haven't perfected that yet. And so we still have people who are at those income levels not applying, and paying for tuition is a burden. All of classical music is expensive. So we are trying to work towards making that not something of shame or embarrassment, but an option that people are readily seeking out and feeling good about choosing that option. Final thought. Oh, 1 minute. Oh, well, I'll be fast. Our final thoughts are, every time we tried to do something quickly, it pretty much was wrong. We needed to iterate and hear from more perspectives and do a bunch of drafts on every single different thing we wanted to do. So efficiency is the enemy of inclusion. We also regularly were reminded that there are people who are better at this than we are, who have already been doing this work, so to seek them out for advice and also to uplift the work they're already doing. Making the implicit explicit, which I've talked a little bit about, and also continuously remembering to think about who's convened at the table, who has power to make decisions. Certainly as a white woman from the suburbs leading this work, it's important for me to always be aware of who gets a say, who's consulted, and who has decision-making power in all of these issues. And that's it. You are welcome. If you have any questions about this or where we're at, or CYSO in general, I'd love to hear from you. So that's my email address, and a bunch of happy kids. Thank you.